Good afternoon, everybody, or morning, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for being here today for the launch of our zoning atlas in Utah. I'm Sarah Bronin, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here today. Next slide, please. Our speakers include Rob Terry, the statewide land use training director from the Utah Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman. He'll join in just a few minutes to talk about his office and his role, their role in this project. Also joining me from the National Zoning Atlas team, Joanna Kaufman, our project manager, who fearlessly spearheaded our Utah work, as well as Christine Canonizado, who does both sides of our analysis, one of our analyst team members who performs both the analysis of the text and the geospatial analysis, and comes to us from UC Davis, where she worked on the California Zoning Atlas as a student. With that, I want to thank our partners at Arnold Ventures, who helped to fund part of this project, as well as Ivory Innovations, our on-the-ground Utah partner, who has supported us from the beginning of our project and who we've grown along with. And I do want to especially recognize one of the funders for our project, the Utah Department of Commerce's Office of Property Rights Ombudsman. They, through the Land Use Training Fund, helped to support the analysis for this project. And as I mentioned, Rob Terry is here to talk about his office and the broad educational goals that they have. So Rob, please feel free to take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. Thank you very much. So my name is Rob Terry. I serve as the statewide land use training director for the state of Utah. I'm housed in the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman, which is an independent, neutral office in the Utah Department of Commerce that safeguards the property rights of the citizens of Utah. The office assists citizens and government agencies in understanding and complying with property rights laws. They resolve disputes and advocate for fairness and balance when private rights and public need have any type of conflict there. So I'm actually the only non-attorney in the office. I focus primarily on land use training and education in the administration of the Land Use Training Fund. To be able to fund many of the activities that happen there. Of course, the attorneys in the office focus primarily on mediation between private property owners, local agencies, state government agencies, whatever it might be that's specific to that project or that item. They do that typically mediation items through something called an advisory opinion, which is where all of the facts and everything of a case or a process going forward is brought to them. They will analyze all of these facts and they will say, based upon state law, based upon the facts of that case, any precedent setting items in law, they'll analyze those items and say, if this were to go before a judge, this is likely the way that they would rule based upon all of those items. It's a very unique type of thing that the state of Utah does. But the goal there, of course, is to be able to help people mediate through these items without having to go through a very time-extensive and typically very, very costly legal process, but be able to get really oftentimes to that same type of result without having to go through the drudgery of that, in all honesty. So great thing. That's what the attorneys in our office focus on. Like I had said, I focus on land use training and education. And one of the primary items that I do there is the administration of the Land Use Training Fund. And our office provides training and education on land use topics and resources that support all individuals and organizations in addressing land use within their individual communities. We focus on maintaining neutrality, balance, and supporting collaboration because these things are not only paramount to the operations, but they're paramount to our office and ensuring that we are providing fairness across the board. So as a result of that, there's many third-party organizations like the National Zoning Atlas that participate in funding provided through the Land Use Training Fund. And the goal there is for everybody to provide and maintain a robust and diverse set of resources and tools that are going to support everybody that's involved in land use discussions, processes, and decisions throughout the state. So grateful to be here today. I'm grateful to Sarah and her team and the items that they will be able to present here and the findings from their organization as they have gone through the items here to launch the Utah Zoning Atlas. Sarah, hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I do notice in the audience folks from other states. The Utah office that Rob works with is really unique. And I think we have been, through our partnership through with several Utah-based organizations and individuals, really seen what I think Rob had mentioned is called the Utah way. So we're going to try to respect that Utah way throughout the course of our presentation today. And hopefully we've done that through the way that we've collected the data as well. With that, I'll turn to our presentation today. And we are going to proceed in 5 parts. I'm going to start by talking about why the National Zoning Atlas. Joanna, our project manager, will turn to how the project is made. Then we will give you a demo on using the Zoning Atlas. Fourth, we'll present the findings that we had at a statewide level, and these are our initial findings. Of course, we've swept through the state, and we know that there will always be updates in different jurisdictions. So, but this is a point in time look at what we've seen to date. And then I'll come back in and close with a few ideas based on what people have done in other jurisdictions about how folks in Utah can actually utilize what we have produced through this project. So first, we're going to talk about why we are building the National Zoning Atlas in the first place. But I think we should start by just saying what the National Zoning Atlas is. It is an online interactive map, very basically documenting information about zoning. And in particular, we're logging key information about housing. And those rules, as noted on the next slide, include information about the types of process that might be used in a zoning application for housing. Things like minimum lot size or lot coverage, setback requirements, things like parking mandates, how many parking spaces are required before you can build a housing unit, as well as accessory dwelling units, whether those are allowed, what types of processes are allowed before they can be built, and also what types of occupancy requirements are there before you can build an ADU. There's a lot more information that we log, but that just gives you an overview, and we'll talk in greater detail about some of these particulars later in the presentation. We actually go through this effort to log information about zoning because we view zoning as a constraint on housing, and we think that understanding how it works and how it impacts economic growth and smart development is really the baseline for our decision-making about where zoning goes in the future. So we are logging how zoning is now so that we can understand it at a scale that we've never been able to understand zoning before. And again, our particular focus is housing. We know that in Utah, the issue of zoning and housing has been front and center for several years now, but especially recently. As the state looks to the 2025-2026 legislative session, there's been a lot of articles, and here's a few of them that we found that talk about the issues of housing cost, housing affordability, and zoning's role in it. I do want to point you to just a few months ago, the Salt Lake Tribune published an op-ed by one of our Utah-based interns. And it'll queue up if you just advance the slide. Yes, our animation works. And our Utah-based student intern had written an op-ed about our very initial findings about suburban and urban zoning in a couple of areas. So I recommend that op-ed to you, and I think it also speaks to our interest in continuing to involve students. But again, across the state, across the board, people are recognizing that zoning and housing are linked, and understanding zoning, again, is part of our effort. So we've done that actually on a nationwide basis. We are the National Zoning Atlas presenting the Utah Zoning Atlas today, and you can see why we are called the National Zoning Atlas. It's because we've worked in almost 9,000 jurisdictions across the country. Utah is one of 15 states for which we have completed statewide analysis. Even outside those 15 states, and so those are the ones that are called out with their initials or their postal codes, we've definitely worked in other states. My home state of Texas, Montana, Wyoming, Oklahoma, lots of the eastern jurisdictions. Most recently, we've been working in Maine and jurisdictions in New York and Ohio and Michigan. So again, we've worked all over the country, and for that reason, we found some really interesting information about zoning on a statewide level, and then also across different types of geographies. Um, as I mentioned on the next slide, here's some of our stats. Published jurisdictions, almost 9,000. We've covered 54% of the US population in the jurisdictions that we've analyzed, and 55% of the land area. We've published almost 100,000 different zoning districts to the map. And so, as our analysts will explain, zoning districts are how zoning works. It's the building block of zoning. Every district is assigned different rules, and those are the rules that we log. We've read over 1 million pages of zoning codes. Every page we scour, we draw out information from it so that we can build the most accurate and up-to-date map. How it's made, Joanna is going to describe this. It's a pretty time-intensive process. Our analyst team is really excellent, and I'm going to turn it over to her because she manages this process in jurisdictions across the country. Thanks, Joanna.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Joanna Kaufman, a project manager at the NZA. I've reviewed zoning data collected by our team in a number of states, including Utah, Nevada, and Colorado. I'd like to take a moment to briefly explain the NZA methodology. Analysis begins by identifying jurisdictions. These are cities, counties, and towns with zoning authority. Here we see 6 of the 279 jurisdictions that have the right to exercise zoning in Utah. Our team was able to complete analysis for 97 of these jurisdictions. Once we have identified that a jurisdiction is zoned, we collect the 2 main components of a complete zoning code, the zoning text and the zoning map. Both are necessary. While the zoning ordinance contains a lot of the key information, we also need to know where its provisions apply throughout the jurisdiction and how much land is allocated to each use. Here we see images of the text and map used for our analysis of Provo City. Each jurisdiction with zoning is made up of zoning districts with different regulations. Here's a screenshot of 17 of the 105 zoning districts in Provo as they appear on the NZA editor. You can see the district names along with the type of district, ranging from primarily residential to non-residential. And most districts in this particular list are base districts, which are the base classification on the zoning map, but there are also overlay districts, which are districts that overlap one or more base districts to provide additional regulations in line with the objective of the overlay. With a complete code, team members then follow 2 work streams per jurisdiction: text analysis and geospatial analysis. The text analysis first identifies the list of districts and logs key data points using NZA's standardized methodology. The geospatial analyst locates its zoning districts and, depending on the available format, either digitizes a static PDF map or standardizes existing geospatial data. The 2 work streams work hand in hand to create the zoning districts as they appear for each jurisdiction on the atlas. Zoning analysts record up to 200 data points for each district. Key elements include the type of housing permitted, from single family to 4 or more multifamily housing, and whether these homes are allowed as of right or require a public hearing. Analysts also log minimum lot sizes, yards, setbacks, building heights, parking requirements, affordable housing provisions, accessory dwelling unit regulations, and much more. I'll now turn it over to Christine to discuss how you can use the NZA.
Thank you, Joanna. I'm Christine Canonizato, a zoning and geospatial analyst at the NZA. Now that we've covered the basics of how the atlas is populated with zoning data, we're going to walk through how to use the interactive map and how to get the most out of its features. To follow along with me, head to zoningatlas.org/atlas. You can use a computer or mobile phone, but know that the size of the map will be different for both. While you get set up, I'll share the map viewed at the national scale. Here, the legend reflects the zone status of the jurisdictions in purple and gray. The areas shown in white are yet to be analyzed and integrated into the NZA. If you have the tribal land and protected land layers on, you will also see these green and green-brown layers. This is most visible in the western states. In the Legend and Layers options box, in the upper left corner, you have a few options to toggle on and off additional layers and features. You can also change the base map here. Now we'll use the Zoom and Filter box to explore a chosen geography. When we selected Utah in the state dropdown, the map zoomed to the state. Zooming in allows you to see how different places permit housing or not. And we can be even more specific with our geography selection. We see St. George in the metro micropolitan area dropdown, Washington County in the county dropdown, and St. George in the jurisdiction dropdown. The map zoomed to the city of St. George and outlined the jurisdiction in black. Please note that you can only select one jurisdiction at a time. At this scale, notice that the legend updates to show zoning district type. Light purple areas indicate primarily residential districts, meaning these districts are primarily zoned for residential uses. Dark purple areas indicate mixed with residential districts, meaning these districts allow a mix of residential and non-residential uses. Tan areas indicate non-residential districts, meaning residential as a primary use is prohibited. These zones typically allow industrial uses, airports, or open space. Now let's apply filters to the map. The Show Me Where People Can Build box has options for quick filtering, like to show where missing middle housing or apartments are allowed. We toggled on the single-family homes filter, and you can see the map lost some color. Areas remain colored in when their criteria satisfies the selected filters. In other words, this means that you can build a single-family home anywhere the map is light or dark purple. In the lower right corner, the filtering results box calculates the zoned areas and number of districts that satisfy the filtering criteria. According to these results, 59% of zone acres in Provo, or 48% of zoning districts, allow single-family housing by right. Note that the filtering results only apply to the calculations for the single selected jurisdiction. Going back to the Show Me Where People Can Build box at the top left corner, we toggled where apartments with 4 or more units can be built, and you can see the change in locations that meet the criteria. According to the filtering results box, you can see that the percentages drop to 20% of zoned acres or 7% of Provo's zoning districts, meeting the criteria for apartments with 4 or more units. The sharp disparity between single-family and multifamily housing are permitted is readily apparent if we toggle back and forth between these two filters. Now let's look at the Advanced Filters box. You can use it for selecting more specific filtering criteria, like whether 1, 2, 3, or 4 plus family housing is also subject to public hearing, minimum parking requirements, or height caps, among other options. We've selected criteria where one family housing is allowed as of right and has a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. And according to the filtering results, 32% of zone acres or 25% of zoning districts in Provo satisfy this criteria. With that, I'll pass it back to Joanna.
Thanks, Christine. Now that we're more familiar with the atlas and database, let's see how Utah zones. I'll start with some statewide figures just to give you a sense of how zoning comes together across Utah. This screenshot from the atlas shows that most land in Utah is zoned. In fact, 259 of its 279 jurisdictions have zoning, shown in purple, and 20 do not. These are shown in gray. So across all 250 jurisdictions with zoning and complete codes, we analyzed just over 45,000 pages of zoning ordinance text and logged up to 200 data points for each of the 4,534 districts that make up the zone land of Utah. We found an average of 18 districts per jurisdiction and an average of 180 pages per code. These are mostly standard figures in terms of what we've seen across the country. Now let's break down the share of land categories across Utah. Only 21% of the land across the state is subject to zoning. This may seem minimal, but this 21% is where over 99% of Utah's population lives. 68% is protected land, which includes Utah's world-famous network of national parks like Arches, Bryce Canyon, and Zion. The remaining 10% is unzoned land, which includes the 20 jurisdictions that do not have zoning, tribal lands outside of Utah's state zoning authority, as well as private land and unzoned rights of way within zone jurisdictions. Of that 21% of zone land across the state, most of it, or 91% of it, allows for housing. That's divided into 57% primarily residential and 34% mixed with residential. Only 9% is limited to non-residential uses such as industrial, institutional, or open space. Let's take a moment to dig into the zoning specifics of residential development in Utah. First, we'll look at types of housing permitted across the state, and then we'll compare how much land allows multifamily housing in Salt Lake City, the greater Salt Lake City metro, and Utah as a whole. For this presentation, we define multifamily housing as residences with 4 or more units. This table shows the share of residential land zoned for different types of housing. From left to right, there are columns for 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more family housing. The darker blue represents the percentage of housing allowed by right. The lighter blue requires a public hearing, and the gray is prohibited. 99% of land allowing residential development across the state allows 1 unit per lot by right. That means single-family housing can be built on virtually all residential land in Utah. Now compare this to the 2-family column, which drops down to 24%. Now, 4 or more unit apartments are only allowed by right on 3% of Utah's residential land. We see they're allowed on another 7% of land after a public hearing, but these are discretionary legal processes which add cost, time, and uncertainties that can discourage projects altogether. So in many cases, public hearings can, in effect, function as a form of prohibition. Speaking of prohibition, the large gray bar shows the most common approach to 4 or more family housing in Utah. That is to say, multifamily housing is prohibited entirely on 90% of residential land across the state. But how does multifamily housing fare in the Salt Lake City metro? As we can see by these figures, its distribution across the region is far from even. In Salt Lake City, 4 or more family housing is allowed by right on a full 97% of the city's residential land. In respect, the city's zoning reflects a strong commitment to housing diversity. It's also notable that a large share of residential land in Salt Lake City allows multifamily housing than single-family homes, 97% compared to 81% for single family. While not unheard of, this pattern is uncommon and encouraging. Beyond the boundaries of the central city, multifamily housing is only allowed on 5% of residential land across the broader metro area, which is in line with the 3% statewide figure. Now let's turn to another important zoning regulation, minimum lot sizes. These rules set the smallest amount of land on which a home can be built. Lot sizes are regulated in terms of either square feet or acres, but these minimums can often be quite large, which effectively mandates unsustainable land-intensive development patterns that fuel sprawl, drive up housing costs, and limit who can afford to live in a community. As a quick note for this presentation, we use 40,000 square feet and 1 acre interchangeably because 40,000 is such a common minimum lot size that it's sometimes referred to as a builder's acre. A big round number like 40,000 simplifies calculations, and it rolls off the tongue easier than saying the true acre size of 43,560 square feet. But in effect and intention, they're basically the same. This donut chart shows the breakdown of minimum lot size requirements for single-family zone land across the state. The darker the green, the larger the required lot size. 70% of single-family land requires lots of at least 40,000 square feet or roughly 1 acre. Within that, 62% requires 80,000 square feet or more. For context, this is comparable to the footprint of a large warehouse. Also notice that 16% of single-family land has varied lot size standards. This usually means a single zone allows several single-family housing types, where each type is tied to a different minimum lot size. Zooming into the Salt Lake City region, we can see how minimum lot sizes tighten in the central city and expand as we move outward. Within the city, only 5% of single-family land requires lot sizes larger than 1 acre. In fact, 71% of single-family land requires lot sizes less than 10,000 square feet. And even better, an additional 12% carries no minimums at all. Across the metro, however, the pattern shifts. A quarter of single-family land requires larger lots than an acre. And again, statewide, the trend towards large lot development is even more pronounced. 70% of single-family land requires lots over an acre, with many requiring far more, 20, 40, even 100-acre requirements for sprawling single-family estates are not unheard of. Up next are accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. These are secondary homes located on the same lot as a primary residence. ADUs are gaining popularity as a cheaper, flexible, and meaningful way to expand housing options in communities across the country. This donut shows ADU permission on single-family zone land across the state. The darkest orange is the most permissive, lightest orange is the least permissive, and gray is prohibited. While ADUs are allowed by right on 10% of single-family land and prohibited on 14%, the most common approach to ADUs, which applies to 75% of single-family zone land across the state, is to allow them with occupancy restrictions or rules about who can and or who must live there. Often the owner must occupy one of the primary or secondary units. Other times the ADU is limited to family members, employees, or elderly tenants. If ADU occupancy restrictions are so common statewide, what does that look like in Salt Lake City? Interestingly, here we see the opposite pattern from other zoning provisions. ADUs are most restricted in the central city and become less restricted as we move outward. Within Salt Lake City, every ADU in the city is subject to occupancy restrictions. The only exception is a mobile home district where ADUs are entirely prohibited, which accounts for that remaining 1% of land. At the metro scale, this share drops to 87% of single-family land allowing ADUs, but with occupancy restrictions. And again, the statewide figure drops again to 75%. Finally, let's look at parking mandates. Parking consumes valuable land and can be expensive to build, making it an important regulation to track because those added costs can deter new housing. In Utah, 92% of residential lands have rules requiring off-street parking. These regulations apply across our 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more family housing treatments. Parking requirements in Salt Lake City and Salt Lake City Metro are comparable at 91% and 95% respectively. However, jurisdictions do not have parking requirements. Now I'll pass it back to Christine to discuss our zoning snapshots.
Are you interested in exploring stats for any location in the NZA, or do you want to create your own graphics? Then I encourage you to look at our zoning snapshots tool. A zoning snapshot is a visual summary of any jurisdiction, county, metro micropolitan area, or state published to the NZA. As an example, from left to right, here are zoning snapshots for Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, and the Salt Lake City metropolitan area. With these snapshots, you can easily review key zoning statistics for different geographies at a glance. You can create your own zoning snapshots by going to zoningatlas.org/snapshots. With that, I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Great, thank you so much. And so I'll close it out with just a few slides showing you how others have used the National Zoning Atlas or how our team has analyzed data, and so that you can consider it as you look at the Utah Zoning Atlas in greater detail. I'll also note I already see a question in the Q&A. Please do add questions to the Q&A because we will have a few minutes at the end for those. So just again, in the spirit of discussing ideas about how you might look at the Utah Zoning Atlas, we about a year ago published a paper in Zoning Practice, which looked at the way that zoning codes were written in other states, for example, New Mexico. And what we found was that about a third of the states, a third of the studied jurisdictions had what our analysts said was a significant discrepancy between the text and the map. As we discuss in that paper, that might be a due process issue. And so when you think about some of the issues, and we'll talk about those certainly in the Q&A, and I think one of the questions that's in there might ask us to address this. When we have a discrepancy between the text and map, or when the text isn't clear or the map isn't clear, that's an opportunity for local agencies to update either their map or their text or make it a little bit more clear, and in that way promote property rights, because we all want, as if we're property owners, a good understanding of what laws apply to us. So that's an opportunity that we've noticed is brought forward by our analysis in some states. In the next slide, we feature a report that we published back in June on Colorado zoning. So just like we have in Utah, we have logged all of the zoning in Colorado. We found that nearly 70% of land prohibits the most affordable types of housing, and that there were very, very large lot sizes across the state. 86% of residentially zoned land requires 2 acres for a single family home. We also found there were big differences between single family housing and multifamily housing again, at a statewide level. So we highlighted those and other statistics, including region-wide statistics, in the zoning report Colorado that's available on our website. And we'll just point you all to the fact that you can analyze trends that are available on the zoning atlas, both through the map and the snapshots. And you can, again, follow some of the analysis that we did in Colorado for Utah. We also know that the zoning atlas has resulted in laws being changed, certainly at the local level, but also at the state level. One of our earliest success stories in that regard was through a partnership with the Frontier Institute, a libertarian think tank in Montana, not too far away from you guys. But they highlighted through zoning data that they had collected and included in our map, and now we've expanded our work in Montana as well. But they highlighted how missing middle housing, so 2, 3, 4 family housing, accessory dwelling units were not really being allowed based on the data that they were collecting and that we again featured on our map. So they use that to lobby for pretty big zoning reforms. Some might call them property rights reforms, others might just call them common sense reforms. But in any case, they, with our data, helped to convince the legislature that change was needed to loosen some of those constraints on housing development. Similarly, as we have done in Massachusetts, we have actually been able to log updates, including through state laws and new guidance that's put forward by state legislatures, but also updates at the local level. In Massachusetts, we are tracking a bill that requires certain local governments to update their zoning codes to enable more housing around transit stops, certain types of transit stops. And we are developing the back-end data infrastructure so that we can do something pretty similar when other statewide rules go into effect, which override local zoning, as opposed to the Massachusetts approach, which is to ask local communities to update their codes to comply with statewide guidance. So again, we are looking at the National Zoning Atlas as a way to measure change over time, to measure the effectiveness of reforms, again, either at the local or state level, and to provide comparisons back and forth. And then finally, we've also seen that the zoning atlas has helped to inform state policies and also the understanding on a statewide level of zoning at scale. So right now we have been working with the state of Arizona, which the legislature has asked the state agencies to track, the housing agency specifically, to track how local governments are allowing for housing, and they're asking the department to track certain measures. So our data is helping to inform that. I did write an op-ed back in February about zoning and housing and the relationship there. But what we essentially are trying to do is to help both local and state officials in Arizona to understand how they can actually permit more housing to fill a pretty sizable housing gap. Like Utah, Arizona is a fast-growing state, fast-growing Western state, and understanding the zoning landscape there is something that's really important for state legislators, the state policymakers, the department, and I would say the people of Arizona as a whole. So again, just giving you some ideas. On the next slide, we have a number of ways for you to connect with us. But with those ideas, as you can use the map to think about, again, how Utah Zoning Atlas could be used in all of these regards. Please do connect with us, because we do share stories about how the Zoning Atlas has been used. So you can either go to our website and find some of these examples there. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky, on YouTube, and on Instagram, as well as through our email address. So with that, I think we're going to open it up to questions. And I do see a couple of questions in the chat. And the second one's pretty easy, so I'll just answer it live, which is, are these slides, is this presentation going to be available? Yes, probably later today. We will post it to our website for Utah, which is zoningatlas.org/Utah. It's really meant to be a landing page, both for things like this webinar, for basic stats, and also for a report, should we actually get to the point where we can do a statewide report on Utah. We can probably, great. Thanks for coming back on, Christine and Joanna. And we can probably dismiss the question slide and just get to the to our team's lovely faces here. And I'm going to ask you this question that was asked in the chat as well. How do you handle planned communities and master development areas? So I'll ask that question first, and then there's a follow-up that the same attendee asks. So first, how do we log planned residential developments? And I'll turn to Joanna or Christine. Yeah, go ahead, Joanna.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. So we do have a data point that we collect for planned residential developments, which include any large-scale development that requires a coordinated site plan that often allows some flexibility or deviation from standard zoning. And so we tend to log those as, well, it depends what the regulations say, but a lot of the regulations don't have the specific plan developments or planned unit developments or master plan communities that are approved as part of the zoning code. So we often have to make a generalization, and we look at the regulations, and it often will say that, any number of residential uses can be allowed. So in that case, we will log single family, multifamily as public hearing, because the process to approve and entitle the planned residential development usually requires that. It's very rare to have planned unit or planned residential developments that are allowed by right without a public hearing, because it either requires some intensive review process or a rezoning and map amendments. So that's typically how we log them, because we're not looking at regulations outside of the zoning code. We're looking at what's in the zoning code.
Great, thank you so much. The related question is, parts of my city and county include these areas, and the map doesn't show that residential is allowed. It might be worth emphasizing here that there is an advanced filter. I don't know, Christine and Joanna, if you want to talk about the advanced filters and process requirements, because I think we often see for planned residential developments that there's a public hearing required. So if you're just looking at those show me where people can build single family housing or two family or missing middle or whatever those 6 choices are, you're probably, you are only seeing housing by right. So if you go down to the advanced filters, you can choose the type of housing that you're looking at. Let's say one family housing. you can use the drop downs and ask, is it allowed just as of right? So that's that yes answer. Is it allowed subject to a public hearing? That's that maybe answer. Or is it prohibited? That's that no answer in the drop down. That may be what you can, where that might help these areas appear. Now, if they don't appear after you've done that and use the advanced filters, we do encourage you to contact us. So we do have this info@zoningatlas.org for any updates that you have. And we know that we're not perfect, but we are, and so we're really happy to accept any updates. So feel free to check out those advanced filters and email us if it doesn't look like it's showing up correctly. I'm going to pitch this over maybe to Christine. How does the National Zoning Atlas account for townhouses or single-family attached housing, given that codes regulate them differently than multifamily or only allow them in specific districts? So Christine or Joanna, if you want to defer to Joanna, who would like to take that question about basically attached housing?
I think I'll defer to Joanna for this one.
Perfect.
Yeah, happy to answer that. So it really depends on how the code defines the attached housing or the townhome. If the attached housing is clearly 1 unit per lot, by definition, we will log it as a single family treatment. If the definition is vague, or if it's clear that more than 1 unit is allowed on a single parcel, we will log those as 2, 3, 4+ family treatments. And sometimes for townhome developments, sometimes we will log those as planned residential developments because there'll be additional requirements about submitting development plans or some sort of coordinated site plan for the larger development. So it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and in those situations, it becomes critical to look at how that jurisdiction defines that housing.
Do you want to talk a bit about setbacks, because that's certainly an issue? How we log side setbacks, because that's also an issue in the townhouse context.
Yeah, so we can log alternatives for the different data points that we collect, including setbacks. So we would enter different setbacks. If there were setbacks that are only required for detached housing, we would log that as an alternative. So we would know that the attached housing does not require any setbacks. And we see it vary across the board. Sometimes attached housing will only require setbacks, obviously, for one side. We'll have districts that allow 0 lot line housing. So even within a single family district, there might be some variety, and we will log those alternatives unless there's many alternatives, like in the case of form-based codes, where there might be many different types of setbacks. In that case, we just log that there's complexity, but we don't log the individual setbacks for each of those building types.
Yeah, and for anybody who really wants to get down into the details of how we log information, there is a page on our website at zoningatlas.org/how, which does have information about our methods. And we've updated since the last public PDF that we've put out, but the setbacks and the townhouses and how we look at those is pretty consistent with how we do it today. And we're always happy to answer questions about methodology. I think we're at time, although I did want to just get to the one last question about how you can find information about ADU statistics. And for that, I'll point attendees back to the snapshots feature of our website, where you can, and Christine had given the couple of slides about that. So if you're watching this later, you rewind to the snapshot so you get the link, but it's zoningatlas.org/snapshots. And you can actually see those accessory dwelling unit stats in that same orange donut for individual cities and towns. We call those jurisdictions. for counties and any jurisdictions that are within the county. So if a county has 3 jurisdictions, you'll see the countywide stat. For metro and micropolitan areas as defined by the census, and for the state. So if you go to that snapshots page, you can ask it to generate stats by using the drop downs, and then you can scroll down to the accessory dwelling unit. Donut is what we call them, and you can see comparatively what those permissions are from place to place.
Sarah, can I ask one follow-up question on that item associated to ADUs?
Sure.
Just simply because I know that a lot of people attending that are either in Utah or familiar with Utah, there's been a lot of conversation at the legislature over the last couple of years specific to ADUs and has really broken them down into internal and external. And so state law now requires by right internal accessory dwelling units to be permitted. And so I'm curious if the methodology took that into account or not, because the numbers, the way it looks, would make it seem as though the analysis there focused on external or detached accessory dwelling units. And I'm curious to know if it did lump all ADUs together or if that was primarily focused on external or detached.
That's a great question. And I think what you're seeing is that the state legislature may have, it sounds like, overridden local or guided local rules on accessory dwellings, but the text of the local codes hasn't yet caught up to that. So what we show on the National Zoning Atlas right now is what is in the local codes. And so if the state has overridden, we don't show that yet. We hope to have a toggle in the future because there is so much statewide legislation that will allow a user to see what the local codes say versus what the state says. Of course, the state, as the originator of zoning authority, would prevail in those if there was a difference. But what we are logging right now is what we saw at the time when we logged the local zoning information. That provides, again, when you think about the opportunities, that provides an opportunity for state policymakers to just double check what is the difference between the code and what the state at least aspires to. We also on the back end log whether accessory dwelling units are required to be in a detached structure or not. That is something that we've seen in lots of codes. Now, we didn't run the numbers for this presentation on detached versus attached ADUs, but it is something that we log, and maybe that's something that's also worth surfacing somehow. So I definitely appreciate that question. We do get that a lot. What are you showing on the Atlas? Is it state laws or is it local laws? And at this point, we're showing the local laws, but again, it shows the opportunity for additional education and technical assistance to the local agencies that haven't quite been able to update their codes. And again, that's something we do see all over the country, is that especially smaller jurisdictions that don't have the capacity, maybe don't have a full-time staff member that does these planning and zoning oversight for the jurisdiction. We see that those might need a little extra help to get state goals over the finish line. So if the zoning atlas helps to surface some of that, that's again another thing that we hope is useful for local policymakers.
Yeah, great thoughts and additional background. Thank you very much. I think a lot of the items and content that you had discussed today, there has been certainly over the last couple of years in particular laws that have addressed many topics that are either directly related or even adjacent to those items. And so it will be very interesting to see over the coming year plus as local agencies are then implementing changes into local laws to be in compliant with recently passed state law, the impacts and differences and changes that you'll see there. And hopefully the National Zoning Atlas, the Utah Zoning Atlas will be able to have supports needed to update those items so that as people may utilize those resources, they are getting things that are current as adopted for their local areas.
Excellent. Yes, that's the ambition. That's what we're hoping to do in the years ahead. And to answer just that last question in the Q&A before we sign off, yes, if you are looking at a code update, if you have updated your code from what you see on the Zoning Atlas, please do reach out to us. We're happy to incorporate it. And we look forward to working with local agencies in Utah in the future on exactly that. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Joanna, Christine. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Tara, behind the scenes, helping us pitch in on running the slideshow today. And Diana, our engagement director, as always, for prepping us. Thanks, everybody.